Take this money, and take that ruined guest house too." Obinna said it with a laugh. The $10 note brushed against Amara's palm and fluttered to the dusty ground between them. Behind her stood a dead building with cracked walls, a broken signboard, shattered windows, and a sagging roof that looked like one more rainstorm could bring it down for good. "This is more than you deserve," he said coldly. "A woman who failed to keep her marriage should be grateful for anything." Amara looked at him as if she no longer recognized the man standing in front of her. "Obinna, please," she whispered. "After everything we built together, don't do this." But Obinna had already turned away. Beside him stood Zina, dressed in expensive fabric, dark glasses resting on her head, her arms folded with satisfaction. She looked at Amara the way some people look at something broken in the road. Something inconvenient, something they wished would disappear. "You heard him," Zina said. "Take your money, take your ruin. Start over if you can." Amara bent slowly, picked up the $10, and held it so tightly that her fingers trembled. The court papers were still in her small cloth bag. The humiliation was still fresh on her skin. The people outside the courthouse had watched it happen. Some had pitied her. Some had laughed. Some had pretended not to see. And now, with one cruel gesture, the man she had once fed when he was hungry had left her in front of a forgotten roadside guest house on the edge of town, as though her entire life could be thrown away with spare change. What Obinna did not know was that this broken place would become the doorway to a future so powerful, so public, and so impossible to ignore, that one day he would stand before Amara again, not as the man who discarded her, but as the man begging to be remembered with mercy. Stay with this story until the very end, because what happened after that divorce shocked an entire city. This is a story of betrayal, patience, dignity, and the kind of comeback that no amount of money can buy. Years earlier, before luxury watches and private meetings had changed the sound of Obinna's voice, he had been a very different man. Back then, he was just a young mechanic with grease on his hands, hope in his chest, and a constant hunger to become more than the life he had inherited. He worked in a crowded roadside workshop where the air smelled of petrol, metal, sweat, and dust. All day long he fixed motorcycles, patched engines, replaced worn brake pads, and crawled under old vehicles while richer men shouted instructions and drove away without even learning his name. But every evening when he returned home, he carried something the world had not yet crushed. A dream. "I won't stay in that workshop forever," he would tell Amara while sitting on the floor of their tiny rented room. "One day, I'll own a transport company. Not one bus, not two. A real company. Clean buses, good drivers, safe routes. I'll build something people respect." Amara believed him. Not because there was evidence, not because opportunity was already waiting, but because she had seen the fire in him. She had seen the man behind the struggle. She had fallen in love not with what Obinna had, but with what he still refused to stop believing he could become. When he asked her to marry him, many people around her tried to change her mind. Her cousin laughed openly. "You want to marry a mechanic who doesn't even own a toolbox big enough for his own shop?" An older neighbor shook her head. "Love is sweet in songs, my daughter. In real life, rent is not paid with promises." Another woman told her, "A man with ambition is not the same thing as a man with money. Don't confuse the two." But Amara only smiled. "I would rather build a hard life with an honest man," she said softly, "than enjoy comfort with someone whose heart is empty." So they married quietly. No hall, no expensive decorators, no convoy, no designer clothes. Just a small church, a borrowed speaker, a few plates of food, 2 grateful hearts, and a future nobody else could yet see. Their first home was one room at the back of an old compound. When rain fell, water found its way through the roof and gathered in bowls and buckets they placed on the floor. Sometimes the electricity disappeared for days. Sometimes the only meal they could afford was maize porridge in the morning and tea at night. Still, there was laughter in that room. There were dreams in that room. There was partnership in that room. Amara sold bean cakes by the roadside before sunrise. She washed clothes for neighbors. She mended school uniforms. She learned how to keep simple records for the little repair jobs Obinna did on weekends outside the workshop. She encouraged him when clients failed to pay. She stretched every coin so carefully that even hunger itself seemed forced to wait its turn. On nights when Obinna came home discouraged, it was Amara who held the family together with words stronger than money. One evening, he threw his rag onto the floor and sat down with both hands covering his face. "I'm tired," he said. "I'm tired of being overlooked. Tired of watching men with half my skill get ahead because they know the right people. Tired of dreaming so big inside such a small life." Amara sat beside him. "Then don't stop," she said. He looked at her, exhausted. "How do you say that so easily?" "Because I know what quitting sounds like," she replied, "and that is not your voice." He stared at her in silence. She continued, "If the door is closed today, knock again tomorrow. If tomorrow fails, knock the next day. A closed door is not the same thing as a dead future." Those words stayed with him. A year later, an opportunity came. One transport operator in the next district wanted to sell 2 aging minibuses cheaply because he was leaving the business. Obinna was desperate to buy them, repair them, and start his own route service, but he still did not have enough money. He sat in silence for almost an hour before finally telling Amara the truth. "It's the chance I've been waiting for," he said. "If I miss it, I don't know when another one will come." Amara said nothing. That night, while he slept, she opened a metal box beneath their bed. Inside were the pieces of fabric she had been saving to start a small tailoring stall of her own. Beneath those fabrics was the gold bracelet her mother had left her before she died. It was the one thing she had sworn never to sell. She held it for a long time. Then she closed her eyes. The next day, she sold it. That evening, she placed the money into Obinna's hand. He looked down in confusion. "Where did this come from?" Amara smiled. "From tomorrow." When he realized what she had done, his eyes filled with tears. "No," he whispered. "Not your mother's bracelet. Amara, no." She touched his hand. "If this door opens for you, then it opens for both of us." Obinna broke down and cried in her arms that night. He promised her he would never forget. He promised her no matter how high life lifted him, he would always remember the woman who had believed in him while the world was still laughing. And for a while, he kept that promise. The buses came. They were old, noisy, unreliable, and forever in need of repair. But they were theirs. Obinna drove one himself. Amara kept the books, collected fares when needed, prepared food for the drivers, cleaned the seats, and even woke before dawn to pack drinking water and bread for long routes. When one bus broke down, she stood beside the road in the sun, helping passengers move to the second one. They argued sometimes. They worried often. But they were building. Little by little, the business grew. 2 buses became 4. 4 became 7. Drivers began calling Obinna boss. He rented a small office, then a better office. Soon he wore ironed shirts instead of stained overalls. His name started appearing in transport union meetings. Bank managers shook his hand. Local officials invited him to events. Men who had ignored him for years now greeted him with wide smiles and heavy respect. Success had finally arrived. But success, when it came, did not enter alone. It brought attention. It brought pride. And one day, it brought Zina. Zina worked in finance and public partnerships. She knew how to speak the language of status. She knew how to make powerful men feel more powerful. She knew how to praise ambition in a way that turned it quickly into ego. She met Obinna at a business conference in the city. At first, she was only one more polished face in a room full of polished faces. But she noticed something in him. A hunger not just for wealth, but for acceptance. A deep need to feel that he now belonged among people who once would not have let him near their tables. Zina fed that hunger carefully. She praised his rise. She admired his intelligence. She laughed at his jokes. She invited him into circles that flattered him. And then, little by little, she began to speak about Amara. At first, it was subtle. "Your wife seems very quiet," she said once at an event. "She must find these spaces difficult." Another day, she said, "You've become such a serious businessman. You need a public image that reflects where you are now." One evening, while adjusting the cuff of his suit at a gala, she smiled and said, "Some women are perfect for the struggle years. Not every woman can cross into the success years." Obinna frowned. "She was with me before I had anything." Zina nodded as if agreeing. "That is exactly what I mean. She was right for the version of you that no longer exists." Those words stayed with him far longer than they should have. At home, Amara noticed changes before she understood them. He came back later. He answered fewer calls. He grew impatient over small things. The same meals he once praised now seemed too simple. The same woman whose sacrifices had lifted him no longer seemed sophisticated enough for the world he had entered. She tried to ignore it, tried to be patient, tried to believe stress was making him distant. But day by day, his warmth disappeared. Then came secrecy. Meetings that ran too long. Trips that made no sense. Financial papers she was no longer allowed to see. When she asked questions, he called her insecure. When she remained silent, he called her passive. Nothing she did could reach him anymore. One night, she waited at the table until the food had gone cold twice over. When Obinna finally came home, he smelled of expensive perfume that was not hers. "Where were you?" she asked softly. "At work." She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said, "not at work." His jaw hardened. "You need to stop questioning me. I need to understand my husband. You need to understand that I've changed." Those words hit her harder than shouting. She stepped closer. "Changed into what?" He said nothing. And in that silence, Amara felt the first clean crack in the marriage she had spent years holding together with faith. Weeks later, the crack became a wall. Obinna came home early one evening, carrying an envelope. Amara smiled when she saw him. "You're back before dark," she said. "I made pepper soup. Sit down, I'll serve you." He did not smile. He placed the envelope on the table. "Read it." Her hands trembled before she even opened it. Divorce petition. For a moment, she could not breathe. She looked up slowly. "This is a mistake." "It isn't." Obinna. It's over, Amara. She stared at him, waiting for his face to soften. It did not. Tears filled her eyes. After everything? She whispered. After the buses, the hunger, the nights I sat up praying for your business, the bracelet, the insults we survived together. After all that, this is what I mean to you now? He looked away. We no longer fit. She moved closer, desperate now. Then let us repair what is broken. He shook his head. Some things are not worth repairing. That sentence stayed in her chest like a blade. The court process moved quickly, too quickly. By the time Amara understood the shape of what was happening, most of the company's valuable assets had already been shifted into structures and accounts beyond her reach. Obinna had planned carefully. He had lawyers. He had timing. He had people. She had history, sacrifice, and pain, things that mattered morally, but not enough legally. The judge acknowledged her contributions, but the ruling still went against her. Outside the courthouse, while journalists, clerks, drivers, and strangers watched, Obinna took out $10 and pressed it into her hand as though tipping a beggar. Then he handed her a deed. An old roadside guesthouse on the abandoned edge of a highway route his late aunt had once owned. Nobody wanted it. Nobody used it. Nobody believed it could become anything. And that is how Amara arrived at the place where her new life began. The guesthouse was worse inside than it looked from the road. The front desk had termite damage. The mattresses were rotten. Lizards ran across the walls. The kitchen roof was half open to the sky. The water tank was cracked. The signboard was faded, almost white. Wind blew through broken window frames and carried in red dust from the road. That first night, Amara cried until her body ached. She slept on a wrapper spread over the least dirty corner she could find. There was no comfort, no plan, only grief. But when morning came, something inside her shifted. Not because the pain was gone, not because hope suddenly arrived in bright colors, but because she realized she still had herself. And as long as she still had herself, the story was not finished. She stood, tied her headscarf tightly, found an old broom in the back room, and began to sweep. Dust rose in angry clouds. She coughed, cried, and kept sweeping. She dragged broken furniture outside. She scrubbed the counter with water fetched in borrowed buckets. She cleaned one room, then another, then the kitchen. By evening, only a small part of the guest house looked human again. But it was enough. Enough to prove that decay could be challenged. Enough to remind her that ruin is not the same thing as the end. The first person to stop and truly see her was Mama Bisi, an older woman who sold roasted corn not far from the junction. Mama Bisi stood at the doorway, hands on her waist, watching Amara mop the floor. "So, you're the new owner," she said. Amara nodded tiredly. "If this place is the kind of gift enemies give," Mama Bisi muttered, "then your enemies are more foolish than they know." Amara gave a weak smile. "There is not much here." Mama Bisi looked around. "There is shelter, there is road access, there is a kitchen. There are tired travelers on this highway every day. You are looking at what is broken. I am looking at what still works." That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep inside Amara's heart. Over the next weeks, she began surviving with whatever work she could find. She cooked rice and stew in small quantities and sold it to truck drivers at noon. She washed plates in exchange for leftover supplies from a nearby market stall. She rented out one cleaned room to a school teacher stranded by transport delays, then another to a fabric trader who preferred her honesty to the chaos of the bus park. The money was tiny, sometimes insulting, but it was movement. Amara learned quickly that people on the road cared less about luxury than consistency. Clean water, hot food, a safe place to sleep. Respect. She provided all four. Soon drivers began telling other drivers, "There's a woman at the old guest house who cooks like she still cares whether people have mothers." Passengers remembered the taste of her yam porridge. Travelers appreciated that she locked the gates at night. Women felt safer resting there than in the louder roadside bars. Day by day, word spread. A local electrician named Kweku came one afternoon after hearing she needed help with wiring. He was quiet, practical, and honest. The first time he looked at the broken kitchen lights, he said, "This place is tired, but not dead." Amara smiled faintly. That is the second time someone wiser than me has said something like that. He repaired what he could for half his usual fee. When she tried to apologize for paying so little, he shook his head. "Pay me the rest when this place begins speaking again." And slowly, the guest house did begin to speak. The front rooms filled first, then the back rooms. Amara repainted the signboard by hand and gave the place a new name, Amara Rest House. It was not flashy. It was not fancy. But it was hers. One stormy night changed everything. Heavy rain made part of the main road nearly impassable. Several buses were delayed for hours. Travelers came searching for food, shelter, and somewhere dry to wait. Amara did not turn anyone away. She cooked through the night. She spread mats where beds had run out. She shared tea with elderly passengers. She let mothers warm milk for crying babies in her kitchen. By morning, people were posting videos online of the woman at the old guest house who saved stranded travelers like family. One journalist passing through heard the story and wrote a short feature on how a divorced woman had transformed an abandoned property into the safest stop on the route. That article traveled farther than Amara expected. Transport unions noticed. A church group on mission trips began booking her rooms regularly. 2 bus companies made informal arrangements to stop at her place for meals. A delivery manager asked if she could handle packed food orders for drivers on long journeys. She said yes, even before she fully knew how. Money began coming in faster than before. Not riches. Not yet. But enough to repair the water tank. Enough to buy proper mattresses. Enough to tile the kitchen. Enough to hire 2 women abandoned by their own marriages, Ruth and Sadeh, who worked with such gratitude that Amara made a promise to herself. If this place truly rose, it would not rise for her alone. It would become a door for other women too. Months passed, then 1 year. Amara Rest House became Amara Haven Lodge and Kitchen. The front space turned into a proper restaurant for travelers. The back compound held laundry lines, a vegetable patch, and eventually a small bakery that sold soft bread before dawn to buses heading out of town. Kweku returned often to help with improvements. He never pushed, never crossed boundaries, never used her vulnerability to gain closeness. He simply showed up with tools, ideas, and respect. When generators failed, he repaired them. When a freezer broke, he found parts. When thieves tried once to cut through the back fence, he organized local welders to strengthen the gate. Amara noticed all this, but she kept her heart careful. She had learned the hard way that not every helping hand is clean. Then came the development no one could ignore. The government announced a major transport corridor expansion along the highway connecting several commercial districts. A new cargo checkpoint, fuel station cluster, and regional bus transfer point were planned, not far from the junction where Amara's lodge stood. Suddenly, land that had been ignored for years became valuable. Investors appeared. Middlemen appeared. Speculators appeared. Men with polished shoes and hurried voices arrived, carrying business cards and false smiles. They wanted to buy her out. At first, their offers seemed large, far larger than anything she had ever imagined holding in one place. But Amara had learned something by then. Quick money often belongs to people who believe you do not understand your own worth. So instead of rushing, she found a lawyer. A good one. A patient woman named Folake who read every line of every document before allowing Amara to sign anything. With Folake's guidance, Amara did not sell the property. She expanded around it. She leased part of the outer land. She partnered carefully on the fuel stop. She retained control over the lodge, the restaurant, and new retail stalls she built for traders and food vendors. Then she registered a company, Amara Transit Hospitality. That name changed her life. As traffic along the route increased, so did her business. The lodge became a branded stopover center. The restaurant grew into a chain kitchen service for buses and freight routes. She added clean restrooms and a supervised waiting lounge for women and children. That single decision made families choose her location over others again and again. Then came a mini-market, then a training kitchen, then a second property on another route, then a third. Amara hired widows. She hired abandoned wives. She hired young men who had left school and needed honest work. She trained girls in hospitality, bookkeeping, baking, and customer service. And the thing that made people trust her most was not the quality of the buildings. It was the memory of where she had started. She did not pretend she had been born into power. She spoke openly about pain, about humiliation, about being discarded publicly and deciding not to let bitterness turn her into someone cruel. Interviews followed, then awards, then newspaper features about the woman who turned a roadside ruin into a hospitality empire. When reporters asked for her business secret, she answered simply, "I built where others laughed. I served where others exploited. And I stayed when others would have sold." While Amara's world expanded with discipline and grace, Obinna's began to crack. At first, like all great collapses, the signs were small. Payment delays, vendor disputes, driver complaints, fuel losses that did not match records. He had by then handed much of the company's financial control to Zina, who insisted she understood scaling, contracts, and strategic growth better than anyone else. Whenever concerns were raised, she had an explanation ready. This quarter is tight because of expansion. That vendor issue is temporary. Those missing funds are tied up in partnership accounts. These accusations are from jealous people. Obinna believed her. Or perhaps he believed the version of himself that needed her to still be right. Because if Zina was wrong, then what had he destroyed his marriage for? He ignored warning after warning. He signed papers without reading carefully. He took loans against future revenue. He expanded into routes he could not properly manage. He allowed style to replace structure. And one morning, the illusion collapsed. Zina was gone. Her phone numbers were unreachable. Her office had been cleared. Several accounts had been emptied through shell companies and fraudulent contractor payments. Money had moved across borders. Records had been manipulated. Key signatures were his own. By the time forensic auditors understood the scale of the damage, millions were gone. Banks froze operations. Drivers protested unpaid wages. Vendors blocked garages. Passengers complained publicly. Regulators opened investigations. Suddenly, the same people who'd celebrated Obinna's rise were speaking of reckless leadership, vanity, and negligence. His buses were repossessed, one after another. Contracts were canceled. Properties went to auction. The mansion he had once bought with pride stood exposed before strangers who came to inspect it for sale. And for the first time in many years, silence found him. Not the peaceful silence of rest, but the humiliating silence that follows collapse. When the phone stops ringing because the people around you loved your money more than your soul. He moved into a small rented flat on the far side of the city. One chair, one table, a mattress, a television. No laughter, no admiration, no Zina, no power. Only memory. Memory of the woman who had once divided one meal into 2 portions and smiled as though sacrifice were nothing. Memory of the bracelet. Memory of the courtroom. Memory of the $10. Then, one evening, while flipping through channels without interest, Obinna froze. A news program was airing a special on women transforming transport and hospitality across the region. And there she was. Amara. Elegant, calm, self-possessed. Not flashy, not bitter. Stronger than he had ever seen her. The presenter introduced her as the founder of one of the fastest-growing route hospitality brands in the country and a philanthropist who had created job training programs for vulnerable women. Obinna sat forward, unable to breathe properly. The presenter asked, "You went through public betrayal and personal loss. What kept you from becoming angry at the world?" Amara smiled gently. "Because anger can build a wall. But character can build a future," she said. "I realized that if pain taught me how to survive, then healing should teach me how to help." Obinna stared at the screen, eyes burning. He could barely hear the rest. She had become everything he had once dreamed of becoming, yet she had arrived there without losing herself. The next morning, he went to the headquarters of Amara Transit Hospitality. The building stood with quiet authority, all glass and stone and disciplined movement. Staff moved in and out with files, radios, uniforms, confidence. Her company logo was displayed across the front in bold letters. He felt small before it. At the reception desk, he gave his name. The receptionist remained polite but professional. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." No extra commentary. "I'm sorry, sir. Madam Amara's schedule is full today." He nodded and turned away. But he did not leave. He waited outside for hours. Employees came and went. Vehicles arrived and departed. Late in the evening, as the sun softened and security prepared for shift change, Amara emerged with her team. She wore a simple tailored suit and greeted people by name as she walked. Obinna stepped forward. Security moved instantly. "Please," he said, voice cracking. "Just 1 minute. Please." Amara turned. For a brief second, the world seemed to hold still. She recognized him immediately. She raised one hand and security stepped back. Obinna approached slowly. Then, to the shock of everyone nearby, he fell to his knees. Tears ran down his face without restraint. "Amara," he whispered, "I was blind." She said nothing. He continued, words breaking apart inside his mouth. "I traded loyalty for vanity. I listened to poison because it sounded like progress. I destroyed the only person who truly built with me. I thought success meant replacing the people who knew my past. I thought I had outgrown you, but I had only outgrown my own shame. His shoulders shook. Zina took everything, but the truth is, I lost the most important thing long before she disappeared. I lost you. I know I do not deserve forgiveness. I know I do not deserve even this moment. But if there is any mercy left in your heart— He could not finish. Amara stood very still. There was no hatred on her face, no triumph, no cruelty. Only the calm of a person who has already fought and won the war inside herself. Slowly, she opened her handbag. From inside, she took out a crisp $10 note. Obinna looked up in confusion. She bent slightly and placed it in his trembling hand. Then she closed his fingers around it. "This," she said softly, "was the amount you thought my future was worth." Tears spilled down his face. Amara continued, "But that day taught me something priceless. Never let the opinion of a broken heart become the price tag of your life." He lowered his head and sobbed. She took one step back. "I have forgiven you," she said. "But forgiveness is not the same thing as returning." Those words landed with the clean finality of truth. Then she added, "If you want redemption, do not look for it in my doorway. Build it in your own life." She turned and walked toward her waiting vehicle. No drama, no shouting, no revenge speech, just dignity. And somehow, that dignity wounded him more deeply than any anger ever could. But Amara's story did not end at success, because wealth, by itself, was never the destination. She remembered too well what it meant to stand in a broken place with nowhere to go. So she used part of her profits to create the Haven Women's Initiative, a foundation that provided emergency shelter, small business grants, and practical training for women rebuilding after abandonment, abuse, or sudden poverty. She converted the original guest house, yes, the same one Obinna had thrown at her like an insult, into a training and recovery center. The old rooms became classrooms. The ruined kitchen became a culinary training unit. The back compound became a skills workshop and counseling space. Women learned baking, lodging management, tailoring, bookkeeping, and food packaging. Children of struggling mothers received after-school support. Travelers passing the center often never knew the full story of the building. But those who did would sometimes stand at the gate in silence, amazed that the place once offered in mockery had become a sanctuary for hope. As the years passed, Kwaku remained nearby, always steady, always respectful, never trying to claim credit for what Amara had built. One evening after a foundation event, they walked through the old courtyard together. The air was warm. Laughter from a nearby classroom floated gently across the compound. Amara looked around at the walls, now painted bright and alive. "Sometimes I still remember the first night here," she said. "I was certain my life was over." Kwaku smiled. "And yet, this place was only waiting for your hands." She laughed softly. "No. It was also waiting for kind people to appear when I had no reason to trust anybody." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Strength is beautiful, Amara, but so is being seen. And I hope you know by now that you do not have to carry every victory alone." Amara looked at him for a long time. In his face, there was no greed, no performance, no hunger for status, only truth. And after everything she had survived, Truth felt more precious than romance ever could. Whether they later married or simply remained two souls who respected one another deeply, people around them could see something clear. The right kind of love never arrives demanding that you shrink for it. Meanwhile, Obinna did something no one expected. Instead of disappearing entirely, he began showing up quietly at Haven projects as a volunteer. At first, nobody recognized him. He repaired gates, helped repaint classrooms, fixed transport benches, used the same mechanical discipline that had once built his early life before pride ruined his character. He never announced who he was, never asked for sympathy, never used the work to gain access to Amara. One afternoon, she saw him repairing a broken loading cart behind the training center. When he noticed her, he stood respectfully. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not refusing my labor." Amara looked at the repaired cart, then back at him. "Work done with humility is never wasted," she said. He lowered his eyes. "I am still learning how to become the man I should have been." She nodded once. "Then keep learning." And that was enough, because not every broken marriage is meant to be restored. Some are only meant to teach. Some are only meant to end so that dignity can live. In the end, Obinna learned what wealth had hidden from him for too long. A person is not rich because others fear losing access to them. A person is rich because character stays when everything else leaves. He had once stood above Amara with $10 in his hand, believing he was deciding the value of her future. But the truth was simpler than that. He was only revealing the poverty inside himself. Amara, on the other hand, lost the marriage, lost the comfort, lost the illusion, and still kept the one thing that turned out to matter most: her character. And because she kept that, she could rebuild anything. Even from dust, even from mockery, even from a roadside ruin. So, if you are listening to this story while standing in your own broken season, remember this. An insult can become a doorway. A rejection can become a map. A public humiliation can become the moment heaven forces you to stop begging at the wrong table. Sometimes the place where they leave you is the exact place where your real life begins. And sometimes, the greatest comeback is not becoming richer than the person who hurt you. Sometimes the greatest comeback is becoming whole again.